Hey guys, Luton here, and another late night randoms for a while. Haven't had one for a while. I'm joined by Daskro today, so we're just gonna have a little chat around Battlefield 4 and stuff like that. So Daskro, you at PAX the other week? You got a little chance to play Battlefield 4?
Actually, I didn't play
You didn't
Battlefield.
play? Oh my god, travesty! Go on.
Yeah, I spent all that money and all that effort to go there, and I didn't even play it once.
Oh
And
man,
the reason being was that it didn't look like something worth playing. And I know that sounds like a terrible
what?
thing to say, but
Shut
here's
up!
the issue. The issue was is that it looked like a pre E3 build.
Really?
Yeah, so as an example, you couldn't get in the patrol boats. The engineers didn't have RPGs or SMAs.
Mm.
And so tanks basically could kill tanks, but you could if you were in infantry, you were basically shit out of luck unless you could C4 them. But I think C4 wasn't in there either. I could be mistaken there, but
That's weird, isn't it? That's like
it
a bit
was
strange.
it was weird. And then on top of that, they had limited the number of players playing at a given time, and so you were only playing against six other guys at any given time. And
Really?
so you were playing on that Conquest large style Siege of Shanghai map,
Yeah.
and yet you'd only find two or three guys maybe, and that was it in such a big map. It's like playing Operation Firestorm
Whoa.
64 man with only 12 people. It kind of it's
At
kind of
PAX as well. That's weird. Like I would have thought that they would, I think I did a bit of a Christopher Walken impression there, but it's weird. But like it is. It's really
it was
strange. Like you would think like that's a big game show. Why the
my
hell would they do
my
that?
my guess is that they had a limited amount of floor space, and they
Mm.
decided to. And this was all not in the EA booth. This was all in the Xbox One booth. And
Yeah.
mind you, the Battlefield 4 presentation was all being played on Xbox controllers. However, the the actual hardware was all PCs. We actually
Yeah, I heard
saw
that. Yeah, yeah,
guys getting out the mouse and keyboards and resetting them and things like that.
yeah.
And they had an equal amount of space for Battlefield 4 as they did for Titanfall. And
Mm.
Titanfall, I imagine, was also running on PCs as well, but with Xbox controllers. And they had to dedicate an amount of floor space to each one.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine that if you were to do them on console, you probably couldn't even fit 64 there, even if you wanted to, for how much space they had.
Good
So,
point. Yeah, good
I
point.
mean, I can appreciate why it's a problem. And then on top of that, during some of the times that during BF4 gameplay, there were times in which the server was populated with more than 12 people, with like up to 20 or 25.
Mm.
But these people were not on site. They were. It was actually very specific usernames. They're all Pokemon usernames, surprisingly. Um, all playing the game offsite, and you knew it was offsite because the ping differential was so big.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's
So
really curious, but I mean, I think you've had a sort of a bit of general experience with the game so far. I mean, I suppose maybe they're just on a kind of confidence high after Gamescom. There was just like they did so well at Gamescom and they got so much sort of out of that. I was really surprised at like how much information and just general kind of production they put out of Gamescom. I mean, it wasn't just the case of how much footage and information they were giving out to producers. They did so many interviews. They had the live stream cast like all week long, and it was just like a tidal wave of information. There was just
there
more.
was.
I mean, I mean, Level Cap were talking the week, and we were just like, dude, I don't know what videos to make. There's too much stuff. Like, we didn't know what to make. He ended up making these kind of breakdown videos every day where I'd just run through and be like, okay, here's what I've got today. It's blah 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 blah, and just go through it all. There's just so much going on there. But I think it was a really great move on their part to do that because I think people were so starved of information to that point. I mean,
Yes.
E3 for sure was great. You saw it all, but then you'd actually get to that point, and everyone was like, crying for scraps of information, and then they just throw the floodgates, and everyone's like, "Oh my god!" It was just like pandemonium. So really, really awesome move there. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
have
go
to
on.
agree. Gamescom was very well executed. Here, it wasn't as much. EA did have a booth, but it had no Battlefield. It was all dedicated to Plants vs Zombies, which just had come out
Yeah, sure.
recently,
Yeah,
and so that was their emphasis, and that made sense because remember, Penny Arcade Expo is not a hardcore PC master race sort of
yeah, yeah,
of convention. It is one focused on all different types of games, including mobile, including casual, including free to play, and as such, it makes sense that they would emphasize that, especially with Plant vs Zombies being released within the last month. So it's a big
Mm.
deal.
What do you think? I've had like I was going to make I'm making a mention of this on another video as well actually. But I've had multiple people message me this week saying that the GSPs or the game service providers for Battlefield 4 are being thinned down severely by sort of DICE, probably not DICE, more like EA, and they're basically saying, look, you know, you want to rent PC servers, it's going to have to be from these providers, and they're
Yes.
basically thinning it down. A lot of people seem to be quite unhappy. What do you think about that? Big deal, or I mean, I guess the kind of general principle is that at the end of the day, EA and that, you know, they want to make sure that they're making the most that they can out of stuff, and I guess they're trying to channel it down to a few specific people rather than just kind of having a bit of a free for all. But what do you? A lot of people say it's going to damage sort of how the game gets played out and how people enjoy it. What do you think?
Well, I heard the exact same arguments being made when BC2 came out years ago because they implemented the whole GSP or RSP concept where not just any mom and pop server provider could provide servers, but instead it had to be to only from a certain number of providers at any given point in time.
Yeah.
And yet, when we saw that take place, I, for one, did not see a significant change within how the game was played per se.
Yeah, that's what I
Now,
figured.
some people could correlate and say, yeah, well, there was some different sort of community servers out there that were not out of nuclear fallout or out of MIS or into reality, and that now are gone.
Yeah.
But I don't think that precludes that given community of gamers to not buy a server elsewhere. So
Yeah, definitely.
I don't really buy that argument that much. What my big concern is that one of the reasons why they said they're doing this or that they may be doing this in the future is because they want to have more control over not just who has the server files, but on top of that, they also want to be able to make sure that each of these server providers are providing a certain quality experience when they do provide their servers in terms of quality assurance.
Yeah.
And that is a big deal for me because in the competitive Battlefield community, DDoS attacks are rampant.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of server providers that already are GSPs or RSPs. They already have the DICE seal of approval, and yet they can't control the DDoS attacks. And it's not as if they can't control it because they don't know how to run their firewalls and their bandwidth is the issue. Because remember with DDoS attacks against Battlefield servers, it's not so much about bandwidth, although bandwidth is a big deal out of it. But for RSPs that have a lot of bandwidth, it's simply not doing IP prioritization in terms of identifying what the good traffic is from the bad traffic is. And that really separates the really good providers from the bad ones, is that the bad ones just let it happen. And if it happens, well, fuck the guy who spent $100 a month on the server. It's not my problem. But instead, I'd like to see more server providers be a lot more active in stopping these kinds of attacks, because in the end, DDoS attacks affect everyone, not just the players, but also these server providers' bottom lines, because it's going through more bandwidth and it costs more money for them, and they should take a much more attentive priority on this kind of issue. And so, if this GSP change makes these servers a lot more active in dealing with this issue, then I'm all for it. But I have suspicions that may not necessarily be the case, and that it may just be another calling of the herd. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like, you're paying for a service from them. They have a responsibility to provide, to give you that service. And like you say, to have a quality assurance that you get essentially what you pay for. But we'll see how it pans out. I think personally myself, I don't think it's going to be the biggest deal in the world. Like, I'm sure that people love to have the option to choose, and I'm sure that, sometimes they might end up paying a little bit more, but realistically, we've seen this happen with multiple other things when changes get made in any kind of system and, the choices get narrowed down to a few specific things. People are going to pay it. They know that people are going to pay it. What are they going to do? Not buy a server? Of course they will. So people may not be happy about it, but I think it's just something that's going to go ahead. However, there are a few people that are trying to put a petition forward and sort of push it towards them. And, good luck to those guys. If that's what they feel they need to do, then, I say go for it. Let's just talk very briefly a bit about weapons as well. You've been known to sort of, have an interest in a few weapons, haven't you? And
yes.
First one of all, helicopter miniguns. We've been beaten on this, dude. They didn't listen to us when we talked about it before. Like, we talked about the power of the miniguns before and how they could have been adapted, and maybe they could put, some kind of longer reload in there and balance it out against having the more powerful. No, they're back to being Skittle Tic Tac guns. You fire like 1,000 rounds and hope to hit something.
Yes.
What do you think about that? Do you wish it had been changed? Are you too worried about it, or just roll with it?
Well, I'm not that concerned that it's being changed. I'm a lot more interested in regards to light helo as it relates to the ECM and flaring system. That's going to be very different than what we see in Battlefield 3, in that you'll have essentially a magazine of flares, five or six, whatever it may be. You'll deplete them, and then they will be replenished over a period of time. Not so dissimilar to how the main battle tank ammunition system operates. I think that's going to bring a very different dynamic into the mix that may actually make the light helicopters question, how much they really want to stay in the fight before they got to get out of the fight, or else they're going to go down.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I don't know about that actually is, do you know this? Do they let's say you run 2-3 flares, you're going in an area, you're getting lock, so you flare it. And then, do they start to then recharge, or do you have to fully deplete before they recharge? Do you know that at all? Or?
I'm going to imagine that. Well, so when you played when I played the armor at E3, it did replete regardless of whether you had 3 rounds in the magazine or no rounds in the magazine. And so you could play sort of a little bit more passively, or to put it another way, a little less aggressively, in order and still be able to maintain a decent enough magazine where you can still have those flares ready just in case.
I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. I mean, when you think about how flares function generally anyway, it's like if you are getting locked and there's a missile coming in, you flare that. Well, there's usually a kind of break period before you can kind of get another one coming in anyway. I can't imagine that you're really going to have to burn through that many to escape it. And you would definitely be able to probably protect yourself enough to get out of there. On the other hand, I mean, if you're getting locked by 3 guys simultaneously and, they release another one as soon as it's coming in, then I guess maybe that would, that's the other thing is have they balanced this up against, is there now, because obviously before there was usually a delay before you could re-flare. Have they removed that and now it's a case that you can just flare, or what's the deal?
Well, so I don't know about that. I'm going to try to check that out tomorrow. For those who don't know, when we're recording this, I'm in Los Angeles today to go to EA Studios in LA to play Battlefield 4 tomorrow. So I'll be able to test out a lot of these things. But I will say that I imagine that it may be that, like you mentioned, where you can flare as much as you'd like and until you deplenish your magazine. But at the same time, I suspect there probably will be some differences in terms of the locking systems, both on the man pads and on the other locking weapons, in that one ECM or one flare isn't going to nullify all the ones that come at you, perhaps. It's going to be just, it nullifies all the ones that are within a certain time window, perhaps.
Well, don't forget as well, we've got the fly-by-wire missiles coming back, and if you're not moving that fast, it's definitely not going to be that hard to hit with those. I mean, if you weren't expecting it to be on the way in, and also if you're running a fly-by-wire missile, it'd be like an RPG. It's not going to, if you're in the heli, it's not going to tell you that missile is coming in. I wouldn't imagine. No. If anybody that's had any experience, running like fly-by-wire missiles in any game, if you're coming in a heli, you're traveling at maybe medium speed, it is not hard for someone to just aim roughly in the direction, fire the missile, and then you can just guide it nicely into where they're going to be. So, there's all of those. So I think you're right. There's going to be other factors with all the new things that are coming in here. I think it's going to be pretty sort of interesting to see what happens.
One other aspect to this, and this has been alluded to by Alan Kurtz, Demise99, the lead multiplayer gameplay developer for DICE, is that he said he wanted to bring back the skill in anti-air combat. And what he meant by that was, and we already see this in E3, is heavier guns on the ground, be it turrets or be it heavy machine guns, matted MGs, whatever it may be, actually do damage more comparable to what we saw in Battlefield 2 or Battlefield 1942 in
Yeah.
terms of damage. So if you are a good enough shot and can lead your shots, you and get hits on those enemy aircraft, you are going to do a substantial amount of damage to them. And it takes a lot of skill to do that, because it's not only you hitting a target at long distance, but you also have to lead it significantly, because it's moving, and you have to compensate for that.
Yeah.
If you can hit those shots, you're going to be rewarded for it by actually doing a lot of damage to it. And so it's no longer about, okay, I either have an Igloo or Stinger, or I have a mobile AA that I can use, and one guy's going to use it. If he's not that good at it, then we're screwed. And we have a stationary AA, which if the guy's not that good, or if the enemy team just avoids it, we're screwed. I like that. I think I like that it's going to be different in that respect.
I'm pleased to see mounted MGs back, because I was a bit disappointed that they weren't in Battlefield 3, because mounted MGs, if you haven't seen them before, if you're new, like in Battlefield 3, in Bad Company and other battlefields, we used to have like mounted MGs. You'd have a big heavy metal shield that you had behind it, and it's usually like a planted emplacement, like the tow missiles that are in Battlefield 3, and you can just sit there and mow people down, or vehicles, or whatever. And I am pleased to see that they're back in Battlefield 3. I've seen Battlefield 4. I haven't seen a lot of them. I've seen them kind of positioned around certain maps in a couple of places, so they're not all over the place, but they are there. And I do think it's going to be really great to have those back, because they're great against infantry, particularly for rush. But like you say, against vehicles as well. There's many maps on Bad Company 2 where the mounted MGs would be really awesome against helicopters. There was, what was it? Was it Valparaiso was definitely one where it was really awesome on.
Yes.
But, you know, they're coming up over the hill, the helis, and then you just open fire with those things. And let me tell you, I piloted a lot in Bad Company 2. Nothing worse than taking like endless MG fire from those things, because they would really burn you down. And if it was a really good shot as well, they can definitely take you out, you know, from the pilot seat. So it's a big worry. The balance with the heavy MGs obviously is that, you know, one RPG hit and you're down. So, you know, it's a kind of double-edged sword if you're firing from those things. But I am really pleased to see those back in the game. But a massive variety of weapons coming into Battlefield 4. I mean, we've seen now kind of, I mean, they've even said it's not the full lists, so there's going to be more to come. But there's a hell of a lot. I mean, somebody was saying that we're talking so many different combinations on so many weapons. It's up to like, I don't know, like over 170,000 different combinations or something like that. So you really can spec out the weapons. I mean, you love your guns and your kit, dude. Like, are you pretty excited about all the customization going on there?
I am.
Oh, you're on the fence. You're on the fence.
I'm kind of on the fence.
Really? Why?
Well, because don't get me wrong, I like weapons customization, but I am not in the in-game stuff. I think it's neat they're going to have all these accessories and these camos and things like that, and different types of muzzle devices, be it compensators or flash hiders or suppressors or things around those lines. I think that's cool. But I'm a pretty but I think the esports side of me gets the best of me in this argument, because I am used to such a rigid, okay, these are the loadouts that you want to use. Everything else is a distraction, and that's the end of it. And that's sort of harkens back to the Battlefield 2 days and 942 days, where you only had 5-6 guns, you only had a few different loadouts, and that was not the end of it.
Just to say, I have to say, like, I actually agree. I kind of like that. I think it really sharpens up gameplay in many ways. You know, when you think back to other titles that have kind of more simplistic loadouts and stuff, it means that you end up focusing so much more on the gameplay rather than, okay, XYZ with all the different kits and customization. So I'm kind of with you there. I'm feeling that, I think. So.
Yeah, but all that being said, I mean, I look forward to it. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. The one thing that I do want to mention, though, and mentioning Alan Kurtz twice now in this cast, one thing that he mentioned in one of his tweets is that for all the complaints that you see about, or all the critique, if you will, about how different gameplay changes are going to impact the game, he sort of mentioned this concept, and I'm gonna call it this. He didn't call it this. Sort of last game-itis. This idea that all these people who end up reading these new features in BF4 or new elements, for instance, the reload feature of flares for light helos, or the ammo reload system within the tanks, or even the damage system of the tanks, always bring it back to the construct of this is how it's played in BF3. I am going to pretend that this that this gameplay change took place in BF3, and that's how I'm going to critique it. When in reality, there are so many other elements that we really don't know about the game, or we simply have not been well articulated because they may be a bit technical in nature. For instance, they've said things in platitudes of suppression's all different. It shakes your camera more, and it changes your recoil. Well, they really haven't shown what that really means. The Synthic guys haven't actually figured out what that really requires. And likewise, we haven't really seen that big of a discussion about the changes in ADS and how ADS may change completely in terms of random bullet deviation. Things we have to worry about in that, and yet a lot of people, when they think about these things, are bringing it back to Battlefield 3, and that's the one thing that I think we have to all keep an open mind on when looking at these different features and gameplay changes, is that it may not be a lot like Battlefield 3. It may be a whole like a past Battlefield game, or maybe something completely different. And that's something that we have to take into consideration when we are looking at these features, because it's only going to be, would we actually get to play the game when we see how well or not so well some of these features actually operate.
Yeah, and I think, like we've said plenty before, that Battlefield 4 really does seem to be quite a different animal. You know, it looks similar. You know, it could be it's the same species, but it's got a whole different sort of, you know, set of systems going on under there. There is so many different mechanical changes happening in the game kind of under the hood, and many of these are kind of very refined details that many people are not going to be aware of. Take, for example, the tier reload thing. Now, this was pointed out to me by a friend of mine, Supra, who I sort of is in my clan, and he talks to me, and he mentioned to me, he was like, oh, I think this has been mentioned, you should take a look at it. And I'd heard about it before, and I kind of was aware, but I hadn't really spotted any gameplay, so I went and looked at it. I was like, oh, okay, that does seem to be there, and I try and find out a little bit more. But I spent the next 2 days like trying to pin down what the hell this thing was doing. I even got them to ask on the stream to it was
with
to
Alex
Lars.
Corey.
Yeah, I've got the guys to ask Lars, and he didn't know what it was. I think in his defense, probably because it's not really his field. It's more kind of like you say, it's like Alan Kurtz's stuff. It's that technical side. But it proves the point that there's a lot of stuff going on there that is, you know, they haven't even announced. The tier reload thing was kind of a nice little cherry pick it wasn't just me, by the way. There was plenty of people on Reddit who had seen the kind of same thing and observed, so it was many people had kind of seen this thing. But as I say, it's just good to see that there's other things going there that they haven't even said. So who knows when we actually get into the beta and beyond, the kind of things that we're going to discover. You know, there is other elements going on there. Suppression, obviously, probably going to be one of the biggest things, but also these kind of reload systems for the vehicles. How is that, you know, we're kind of in this kind of, game convention testing period, which isn't really that kind of like comparable to literal public or kind of privately organized games. So when you actually get into the kind of more serious side of Battlefield, when the game is actually in a kind of more, a format as we know it, then we're really going to start to see. So it's great that we can make these observations at this point in time and sort of go, hey, that's kind of interesting. But until we actually move forward a little bit, we're not really going to know, you know, how we're going to get to grips with these things. So I think there's still tons to like find out and loads of observations to make as we go along the line, you know?
Yes.
All right, dude. So I want to thank Daskro for joining me for this little sort of impromptu discussion. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you much for having me.
All right, guys. So much more Battlefield 4 stuff coming on the way. There's a lot more announcements coming pretty soon. We're getting more information all the time. Stay tuned, guys, to my channel. Stay tuned to Daskro's channel. A lot more Battlefield 4 stuff coming in. So I'll see you next time, guys, for some more late night randoms.